So welcome to lecture number 130 of our study of the Rambam Guide for the Perplexed. Again, for those just tuning in, I'm using the Shlomo Peanuts edition, volume 2. And when I say page numbers, that's the edition I'm referring to. We are very rapidly approaching the end of the Moreh Nevuchim, and our study, which has now been well over 3 years now, we're studying together. So it's really beautiful, and I'm really proud that we stuck it out this long and really studied together so much. It's just wonderful. We're about to start chapter 47, and the Rambam is now in the section where he discusses the reasons for the mitzvot, basically trying to make logical sense out of the mitzvot, demonstrating how they all work, they all make sense, they're all reasonable. Which in the Rambam's philosophy, everything has to have a logical, philosophically, and scientifically valid understanding. So here we go. If you remember, he had divided the mitzvot into 14 groups, roughly corresponding to the books of the Mishnah Torah, right? So the commandments comprised in the 12th class are those, so we're about to discuss the 12th class, are those that we have already enumerated in the Book of Cleanliness. That's the Sefer HaTahara, which is also one of the books of the Mishnah Torah. And basically, it discusses all of the laws relating to ritual purity, basically. Okay? Now, ritual purity is probably one of the things that, for us today, is the most difficult to understand, right? And one of the things the Rambam is going to employ here to help us understand it, because even in the Rambam's time, it was also very difficult to understand. What's the point of all of these things, right? This is impure, this is pure. If you do that, you're not allowed to do this when you're impure. Like, well, what's all this business about? So the Rambam is going to employ an explanation which is familiar to us now, but basically understanding the historical context is crucial. And this is something that the Rambam is going to really drive home in this chapter. So basically, even though we have already summarily mentioned their utility, right? If you remember a couple chapters back, he mentioned how the purity laws are designed overall just to give us a sense of reverence for the things that are holy. Basically, reverence for the temple and the temple service, etc. Right? That was the overarching reason for this entire category. But now, so I told that to you already, but we shall give additional explanations and set forth the reasons for this class of commandments as is proper. But now I'm going to go into more of the details and discuss more details, the specific laws that the Torah puts out there regarding purity, and I'll explain them. After that, I will give the reasons for the various particular commandments. So after I describe the in deeper sense the explanation for the laws of purity, I'm going to go into each and every commandment, those of them whose reasons have become clear to me, right? Because he's going to list several things at the end of this chapter, and someone, I can't remember who, kept on asking if we're ever going to learn about the red heifer, but we're finally going to hit that at the end of this chapter. But or at least close to it. But he's going to basically say the things that he doesn't know the explanation for. So, but at least those that the Rambam says that the reasons that I do understand, I'm going to try to explain. So, I shall then say that this Torah, whenever it says law of God, right? So the modern translations translate it as the Torah, Hashem's Torah, right? Because that's what Rambam really means. But it's just an old translation, which was prescribed, which was taught to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our master, to whom in consequence it is ascribed, came to facilitate the actions of worship and to lighten the burden. So Rambam is starting to present now his argument, and his argument is that we all wonder, what are the reasons for all of these rituals, especially these rituals surrounding the ideas of purity, of tahara and tumah. What's the whole point of all these rituals, right? So the Rambam is going to present an argument that actually the Torah came to get us away from rituals, right? So, and that sounds like a little strange argument, but because when we look in 2025, the whole concept and the idea of a spiritual ritual seems kind of weird to most modern people. Like, doing things, they seem like OCD. We have to do this because somehow the gods are going to rearrange things. It just seems weird to us, right? So nowadays people ask, what do we need rituals for at all? But the Rambam was going to say what actually the Torah was doing was not increasing rituals, it was actually decreasing rituals when the Torah came. All the things in it that you may perhaps imagine to involve unpleasantness or a heavy burden, things that you might think are a pain in the neck, right? Because why do I need to do it this way? I need to do this, I need to do that, I have to go to the mikvah, and immerse myself. I have to avoid, I'm not allowed to touch this, I'm not allowed to touch that, I have to do it. All this stuff is just a burden. It might seem that way, appears so to you only because you do not know the usages and teachings that existed in those days. It seems weird to you because you live in a time, and this is the Rambam talking 1,000 years ago. Imagine how he would say it today, when rituals are onerous, when people say, like, there's no point in, who needs rituals? I don't need rituals. I just want to know God, I know wisdom, whatever. Rituals, it's a bunch of nonsense. That's what people today think, right? You tell me I have to do it this way, I have to hang my mezuzah like this, I have to wear my tefillin like that. That's crazy, right? It's a burden. It's a pain in the neck. I have to eat matzah at a certain time, right? But Rambam I gave those examples, even though Rambam here specifically is referring to rituals that are related to tumah and tahara, purity and impurity. It behooves you to compare a rite in which, for reasons of divine worship, a man, right? You have to think what they were living in. They were living in a time, and I'm at the top of 593. For reasons of divine worship, a man burns his child with one in which he burns a young pigeon, right? You're asking, why do we have this whole business of sacrifices, right? Remember, in the world in which the Torah was given, sacrifices were very common, but those sacrifices were children, right? So when the Torah says don't sacrifice children, sacrifice rather a pigeon, what the Torah is easing the burden. It's getting you away from the ritualistic stuff, as opposed to imposing upon you ritualistic things. Right? This, for as the Torah says, even their sons and their daughters they burn in the fire. That when the Torah is describing the depths of depravity to which the nations that were then resident in the land of Canaan, right, were down to the height of the depravity, it got to the point where they were actually sacrificing their own children. Unfortunately, we know that child sacrifice is something that was very common in many ancient societies throughout the world. This is the world in which the Torah was given, and the Torah says, no, I don't want you doing that stuff. In other words, it was taking us away. This was the worship they rendered to their gods. What corresponds to this in our worship is the burning of a young pigeon or even a handful of flour. So God says, no, I know so I'm going to keep you in the mode of rituals because that's the way you're used to serving God. But, you can just bring a bunch of flour. You don't have to, God forbid, it trembles, makes me shake to even say this, but you don't have to bring a human being, a child, as a sacrifice. In view of this, our religious community, in other words, the Jews that keep the Torah, was rebuked when in a state of apostasy and were told, oh, my people, what have I done unto thee, and wherein have I wearied thee, testify against me? In other words, this is from the Sefer Micha, right? What have I asked of you? I didn't ask of you such difficult things. People around us, they were doing things that were tough. I asked you for something easy. Bring me a pigeon or something. That's an easy deal, right? If you compare it, right? So it is also said concerning this subject, have I been a wilderness unto Israel, a land of thick darkness, right? So he means, what unpleasant burden was imposed upon them by this Torah so that they turned away from it? The Torah was actually easing the burden, right? Instead of the Torah was taking given in a world in which the rituals being practiced were so intense and so awful and so horrific. The sacrifices that were being asked for, which were to the extent of human sacrifice, the Torah is saying, no, I don't want you involved in all that stuff. I want you to do things much easier. So the Torah, in that context, in our context today, in a world where everyone can do whatever they want, right? The Torah might seem like a burden, but when the Torah was given, it was actually not a burden. It was actually a huge relief of a burden, right? All these texts have one purpose. So I just finished the first paragraph on page 593. I'm about to read. This is the second paragraph in the a little bit before the middle of the page on 593. This is a premise of great importance that must not be lost from your mind. You really, really need to remember this. When you evaluate the Torah and the laws of the Torah, you have to remember this principle. You need to understand the context within which the Torah was given. And that in and of itself is the most important thing of this chapter. Because some of Rambam's analyses in this chapter and in past what we studied together and in the next couple chapters, they may or may not speak to me or you. They may not. And you'll see as we go through them. And we've dealt with this before as well, right? You might not like his analysis every time, right? But the principle is something that we need to take into our analysis, right? And the principle is that you have to understand the context within which the mitzvot were given. You have to understand the historical context and the world within which they were given before you start criticizing the Torah and saying, how could this mitzvah make any sense? You have to understand, well, the mitzvah was being given at a time when, and then fill in the blank. And then you could say, oh, now I understand. Now it makes sense. The Torah was trying to get us away from X and closer to Z, right? Or whatever, right? So we have already explained that the whole intention with regard to the sanctuary. The bottom line is, now let's talk about Tumah and Tahara. Let's talk about purity and impurity, right? The whole point with regard to the Beit HaMikdash was to affect those that came into it with a feeling of awe and of fear. As it says, you should fear my sanctuary, right? The point is, we want to create a sense of awe when someone enters the temple, so that person can be appropriately affected spiritually by his or her experience when they enter the sanctuary. Now, if one is continually in contact with the venerable object, right, the impression received from it, if you're constantly there, right, if you're always there dealing with something that's important, right, the impression received in the soul diminishes and the feeling it provokes becomes slight. If you're used to something, it's not that big a deal, right? If every single day you watch, you're in a stadium full of 60,000 people, then seeing 60,000 people doesn't impress you that much anymore, right? But if every day you live in a place and when you go to the where your shul or your church, or you see 10 people there, and now you go to a place and there's 10,000 people there, whoa, that's a lot, that's big. It makes an impression. But if you're constantly in contact with an item, right, then the item impresses you less. So therefore, the sages, may their memory be blessed, have already drawn attention to this notion, saying it's not desirable that the sanctuary should be entered at every moment. Right? We don't want a case where a situation where everyone is constantly going into the Beis HaMikdash every single day, many times a day, right? It's supported, let thy foot be seldom in thy neighbor's house, lest he be sated with thee and hate thee, right? You come to not appreciate the specialness of the place. This being the intention, God, forbade the unclean to enter the sanctuary, in spite of there being many species of uncleanness, so that one could, but for a few exceptions, scarcely find a clean individual. Many people, because there are so many ways of becoming unclean, right? The word clean, it conjures up in our mind images of mud and dirt and grime and smelly, sweaty, whatever. But that's not what we're talking about, is spiritual cleanliness here. But if you're once you add together all of the categories of people that are unclean and therefore cannot enter the temple, there's a scarce few of people that actually can. So most people are not going into the temple all the time, because the state of uncleanness is a state which is very common among the population, right? For even if one were preserved from touching a carcass of a beast, right? So that's one way of getting tameh, right? Is by touching an animal carcass, right? One might not be preserved from touching one of the 8 creeping animals. You might have touched one of the shrutzim. A creeping animal means an animal that walks close to the ground. So it includes various species of turtle and lizard and bug and so on, and rodent, right? Which often fall into dwellings and into food and drink, upon which a man often stumbles in walking. So there's 2 categories. And if one were preserved from that, let's say you haven't touched any lizards recently, right? And you haven't touched the carcass, right? But one might not be preserved from contact with a menstruating woman, or a woman or a man having a running issue, right? Or a leper and their bed, or if one was preserved from that, one might not be preserved from sexual intercourse with one's wife. Remember, because anytime you had a semen comes out of a man's penis, he's all of a sudden not. He needs to wait a day and go to the mikvah before he's allowed to go to the temple. So if he simply had sex with his wife the night before, then he can't go to the temple. So you're talking about a huge number of people, right, that aren't allowed to go. And even if one were cleansed from these kinds of uncleanness, let's say, a nocturnal pollution, meaning even if he had he had a seminal emission during the night from a wet dream or something, he still can't go, right? One would not be allowed into the sanctuary till after sunset, nor was one allowed to enter the sanctuary at night. You can't even go at nighttime, as is made clear in Midos and Tamid. And on that night, in most cases, the man in question would have intercourse with his wife, or one of the other courses of uncleanness would befall him. And he would find himself, I just turned the page, I'm on 594, right? Thus, all of this was a reason for keeping away from the sanctuary and for not entering it every moment. So the bottom line is that only a small number of people were in a state of cleanness, which allowed them to enter the temple. And in a normal, ordinary person's life, there's only a few days when he or she can actually go, right? A woman because of her menstrual cycles, a man because of having semen emitted or some other kind of emission, right? Some of the emissions, like the Zav that he mentioned, is probably referring to something from gonorrhea, but we don't know exactly what it is. That's probably what it is. But anyway, regardless, anything like that, you can't go, right? So you know already what the sages literally say. Even a clean man may not enter before having immersed himself. Even if you don't have any of these issues of uncleanness, you still have to go to the mikvah. You still have to immerse yourself before you go in. In consequence of such actions, fear will continue, and an impression leading to the humility that was aimed at will be produced. So because of this, what happens is when you go, you have this sense. It's a rare occasion. It's a unique, special occasion when you're in proper frame of mind and state of body to be able to go into the Beit HaMikdash, and it will have the impression that it's supposed to have. To the extent that a certain kind of uncleanness was more frequent, purification from it was more difficult and was achieved at a later moment. Being under the same roof as dead bodies, more especially those of relatives and neighbors, is more frequent than any other kind of uncleanness. It may not be for you and I, but it was in the Rambam's day, and it was in the days of the temple. It's not uncommon that a member of the family passed away, right? Accordingly, one is purified from it only by means of the ashes of a red heifer, right? Though these are very rare, and after 7 days, it's hard to find the red heifer, and it's hard to get that process going. But in order to be purified from something which is relatively common, which is exposure to a corpse, right? You needed that. Running issue and menstruation are more frequent than contact with an unclean individual. Hence, these require 7 days for purification. Running issue, that's the a type of emission, not semen from a penis, that makes a man into a zav, right? Which, like I said, is, we assume it's probably a discharge from some kind of infection, probably gonorrhea. And whoever approached someone who is unclean requires 1 day. The purification of a man or a woman having a running issue, or a woman after childbirth, was only completed by means of a sacrifice. For such cases are rarer than menstruation. Also, all these things are disgusting. They're things that people don't think that they're not clean. A menstruating woman, a woman having a running issue, a leper, a corpse, a carcass, a creeping animal, an issue of semen, right? Whether we all carry the same sensitivities nowadays to all of these things, in those days they did have these sensitivities, and that's just the way it was. So therefore, they were considered unclean, and accordingly, many purposes are achieved by means of these laws. One is to keep men away from disgusting things. The second is to safeguard the sanctuary. And the third is to protect what is generally accepted and customary. And the third, and this goes back to the historical thing, and that is, as you will hear presently, I'm going to tell you that you might think that the Torah is being so strict on something, for example, like a menstruating woman, right? But in unpleasant things were imposed on the Sabians in cases of uncleanliness. The customs among the idol worshippers, remember, Sabians is a catch term for pre-monotheistic, pre-giving of the Torah pagans, right? That's what the Rambam, the Sabians, he's been using that term for that. And he's going to tell us that what they used to do for a menstruating woman was 10 times more restrictive, right? So the Torah was actually releasing us from all of these restrictions. He's going to talk that in a minute. Just hang in there. The fourth is to ease unpleasant restrictions and to order things in such a manner that questions of uncleanness and cleanness should not prevent a man from engaging in any of his occupations. The fourth thing is that, by the way, and the Rambam is telling us, all of these restrictions, he's going to emphasize this several times in the next few paragraphs, are only regarding the temple, not regarding the usual activities of life, right? The Torah never said that anyone who has contact with one of these unclean sources doesn't go to work, doesn't eat breakfast, doesn't sleep with his wife in most of those types of Tumah at least, doesn't play baseball. He does all the usual things that he'll do in his general activities of life, right? So what the Torah was doing was saying that this uncleanness is only important when it regards holy things. Because, and as he's going to point out, in those days, the pagans used to, when they encountered uncleanness, right, which were very similar to the categories that the Torah listed, they would restrict that person from engaging in normal, regular activities of life. And the Torah was saying, no. Go about your business, do your thing, eat breakfast, eat lunch, go to the ball game, go to work. Just don't go to the temple, right? So I gave you a little preview, but let's let the Rambam say it, right? For this matter of uncleanness and cleanness concerns only the holy place and holy things, nothing else. She shall touch no holy thing nor come into the sanctuary. As for the rest, there is no sin if one remains unclean. There is no sin in being unclean. Being unclean doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. You touched a turtle. You didn't do any sin by touching a turtle. I touch turtles almost every day driving, because they're crossing the street. I bring them to the other side, right? So I didn't do a sin by touching the turtle, right? There's no, as long one wishes and eats and one's ordinary food that has become unclean, right? You can eat normal, plain old food. You're not eating a sacrifice from the temple. I'm just eating lunch. It's just a sandwich, right? It is generally known that according to the usages observed up to our times by the Sabians in the land of the East, I refer to the remnants of the Magians. The Magians, those are the Zoroastrians, right? Who the Magi were the Zoroastrian priests. There still are practicing Zoroastrians today, but remember, Zoroastrianism was the religion that dominated the Middle East until Islam came about, right? So and he's saying that those, and even after Islam, there were still pockets of people practicing Zoroastrianism, right? The menstruating woman remains isolated in her house. The places upon which she treads are burnt. Whoever speaks with her becomes unclean. And if a wind that blows passes over a menstruating woman and a clean individual, the latter becomes unclean, right? So instead of asking the question of why the Torah that has any restrictions regarding menstruating women, we should be, this is what the Rambam's arguing at least, we should be impressed that the Torah does the opposite. The Torah says, no, forget it. She's, so what if she's menstruating? It's fine. She can eat and drink with everybody. She can go to the store and the wind blows, it's fine. You don't have to burn things. She doesn't have to be holed up in the house and not talk to anybody, right? It's only forbidden to have intercourse with her. The only thing the Torah says is not to have sex, right? So the Torah preserves that one thing, right? In the days that she is unclean and defiled. During those days, remember, from the Torah law, there's no counting 7 clean days, which is the custom today in the Torah law. It's only during the days when she's bleeding that you're not supposed to have sex, right? Another generally no, and the reason for that would be, like Rambam says, in order to maintain our respect for holiness and so on, right? Because it's an unclean thing like the other unclean things that we've listed. It is only for, another generally known usage of the Sabians, right? That continues to our time. If you look at them today, apparently he's arguing that the Zoroastrians or other pagans, I presume if you talk to a Zoroastrian today, they probably wouldn't like it if you called them pagan, but whatever. I don't know enough about what they believe to say either way. Regardless, the Rambam is kind of lumping them all together, right? But they regard as unclean everything that is separated from the body. In other words, anything that comes off your body, hair or nails or blood. So every barber is unclean because he touches blood and hair. Everyone who shaves must immerse in running water. They have many burdensome usages of this kind. So if you look at the practice, and the Rambam is making the assumption that if that's the way they are, because they haven't yet accepted Torah or monotheism in some shape or form, right? So then that's how it was when the Torah was given, and the Torah was given to say, no, 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 it's okay. You can take a haircut and you're fine. You don't have to go immerse yourself in the mikvah just because you took a haircut or you cut your nails, right? They have many, right? Whereas for us, we only claim that something is unclean or clean with regard to holy things and to the sanctuary. It's only relevant when it comes to holy things in order to give us this sense of awe like he described. As for his dictum, I am now in the middle of page 595, the paragraph that starts in the middle of the page. As for his dictum may be exalted, sanctify yourselves, right? Kedoshim to you, right? Right? For I am holy, right? Be holy, sanctify yourselves, for I am holy. It does not apply at all to uncleanness and cleanness. This does not mean the Rambam is amazed. He's trying to preempt us and hold us back from asking a question. Well, doesn't the Torah say that we have to be holy, right? So doesn't that mean that we have to stay away from touching unclean things, right? No, 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 that's not what it means. Sifra states literally, this concerns sanctification of the commandments. This means be holy, meaning keep the Torahs, the mitzvot. It doesn't mean, it has nothing to do with tumah and tara. It has nothing to do with purity and impurity. When it says kedoshim to you, it means be a holy people, right? Follow the dictates of the Torah. For this reason, transgression of the commandments is also called uncleanness. Don't be confused. Sometimes we also use the same term of tumah, which is often referring to this ritual uncleanness, but it also means not keeping the rules of the Torah is also considered tumah. It's also considered unclean, even if it's just a similar term. But it means two different things completely. This expression is used with regard to the mothers and roots of the commandments, namely idolatry, incest, and shedding of blood. Those three commandments, right? If doing them is considered tumah, it's considered impure or unclean, right? The Penis is using the words in unclean, but some translations might use the word impure. Regardless, either way, neither is a good translation, like the Rambam is explaining now. With regard to idolatry, it says, because he has given a seed unto Moloch to render unclean my sanctuary, right? Because he worshipped the Moloch. With regard to incest, it says, do not make yourself unclean when a person engages in this type of behavior, right? And with regard to shedding of blood, it says, my cat just knocked over a whole bag full of peppers I just put on the table. I'm going to have to clean that up later. But anyway, it therefore has become clear in that the term uncleanness is used equivocally in three different senses, right? Right? It's again a term which is used. It's an equivocal term. It means different things depending on the context. It is used of disobedience and of transgression of the commandments concerning action or opinion. It is used of dirt and filth, mean literal dirt, right? And it is used according to these fancied notions, like the touching or carrying certain things or being under the same roof with certain things. So tumah, the word tameh or unclean, which is the way we're translating it now, could mean either not keeping the Torah is unclean, or actually unclean, right? Filthy or dirty, or three, unclean in the sense that you have touched something or been in contact with something that conveys this ritual impurity. With reference to this last sense, the ritual impurity one, we say, I'm about to turn the page, the words of the Torah are not subject to becoming unclean, right? The words of the Torah don't ever become impure in that sense, right? Similarly, right, I just turned to 596, the term holiness is used equivocally in the three opposite senses to the ones we just said. Holy means keeping the Torah, and that's what it means when it said kedoshim to you should be holy. It means keep the Torah. Kedoshim also could mean be actually clean. When it says that v'hayu machanecha kadosh, right, that your camps, your military camps should be holy, it's referring, and it says you should have a spade to dig holes to put the feces, right? It's literally talking about actual physical cleanliness when it uses the word kadosh in the Torah in that context. And then the third is kadosh is also used meaning the context of ritual purity as opposed to ritual impurity. In view of the fact that purification from uncleanness caused by a corpse could only be achieved after 7 days, and also after the ashes of the red heifer have been found. And since the priests were always in need of entering the sanctuary, so every priest was in particular forbidden to expose himself to be made unclean, because it's very practical, right? It's not easy to find a red heifer. They only pop up every once in a blue moon, right? And if the priests have to be always on ready to do the sacrifices, to lead the service in the temple. So therefore, the Torah says that a Kohen, a priest, cannot defile himself, right? Um, so um, because unless it were a case of strong necessity, in which it would be difficult for nature to avoid this, like in contact with one's parents, God forbid, if a Kohen's parent passes away, or his children and his brothers. And as there were great need that the high priest should be constantly in the sanctuary according to its dictum, right, he was absolutely forbidden. But the high priest, because he always needs to be ready, right, he cannot even do it even to those of his relatives. Do you not see that this prohibition does not extend to women? Right? Why didn't, if it had something to do that was inherent in the family of Aaron, then it should apply to the women of the family too. But since the women weren't doing the service in the Mikdash, therefore it says only the sons of Aaron and not the daughters, because women not being needed in sacrifice, they weren't involved in that particular activity. So, as it cannot be avoided that sometimes an individual may be negligent, right? It's going to happen. Someone's going to enter the sanctuary when he's unclean, or eat holy things when he's unclean, or else he might even do it deliberately. He might not care. He might say, I don't care, I'll just do it anyway. So for the majority of wicked people commit grave acts of disobedience deliberately. Often, that very often happens when somebody doesn't take these ideas seriously, and he or she might do something deliberately. So sacrifices were commanded that would atone for the uncleanness of the sanctuary. These were sacrifices of various kinds. Some of them intended to atone for deliberate transgressions, and others committed inadvertently. To go into which sacrifices atone for what is a long topic. For those that are doing the Daf Yomi, to now we're learning Masachet Shavuot. It was probably, I think it was around 2-3 weeks ago, where there were several pages of Talmud discussing exactly which goat atones for which sin, inadvertent ones, advertent ones, and this and that, all kinds of things. The point, not going into that. If you want to, then feel free to study those sections of the Talmud. But the Rambam is just saying the he-goats of the festivals, the he-goats of the new moons, and the he-goat that the Sar Lazazel has been explained in its place. We discussed it a little bit before. Why were all of these sacrifices commanded? So that the deliberate transgressor should not think that he has not committed a great sin in rendering the sanctuary of Lord unclean. So a guy that goes in and does what he does, and he thinks, well, nobody could see, nobody knows that I'm not clean, right? I'm the only one who knows. Nobody cares, right? I can do what I want. It's not important. I didn't get struck by lightning, right? So in order to demonstrate to him that it is important, we bring these sacrifices and say, because you do need atonement for that, right? For it says they did not die in their uncleanness. This notion is often repeated, that there's sacrifices and services in the temple that were done to atone for such things. And what about the uncleanness of leprosy? So there's one other type of tumah which he hasn't yet. He mentioned it a little bit in passing, but he hasn't really discussed it in more detail, right? So we have already explained its meaning, right? I talked about the meaning. Did we study? I'm trying to remember. I didn't skip anything, did I? No, I didn't. But well, I guess he must mean, in the general sense of tumah, when we explained it, the general sense of uncleanness, right? Because people are grossed out by the disease. We did do that together, right? But here he's going to discuss it a little bit more detailed. They have made known to us, right, the sages, that the established principle in regard to it is that it is a punishment for slander. That leprosy is a punishment for slander. Try to be careful in watching what the Rambam says here, because the wording is interesting. And exactly what he means is not 100% clear. And that at first this change appears in the walls, that a person says slander, and then the change happens on the walls of his house first. If the man repents, the purpose has been achieved, he's done, it's over, finished. If, however, he continues in his disobedience, meaning he continues to slander other people, the change extends to his bed and his house furniture. Then it gets onto his furniture. If he still persists in his disobedience, it passes to his clothing, and then to his body. This is a miracle that was perpetuated in the religious community like that of the waters of the woman suspected of adultery, right? There's two miracles which the Torah says occur and are very difficult for rationalists like the Rambam to really explain, right? Because what the Torah is saying is that these two miracles, one where the sota, where the woman is suspected of adultery, drinks a drink, and the drink tells us whether or not she committed adultery, right? Whether she dies or not. And the other one is this idea that I slander, and then depending on whether or not I repent, right, there's this magical thing appears on my wall or on my body, right? This disease of some sort, right? And remember, we use the term leprosy, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with the disease that we know of as leprosy today. Even scholars realize that tzara'at has nothing to do with leprosy. I don't know exactly how. Somebody probably researched this and wrote a book on it, how the word leprosy came to be the translation of tzara'at. But there's no serious scholar that thinks that the tzara'at in the Torah, from any perspective, has anything to do with leprosy. But somebody once upon a time translated it that way, so it's stuck in our brains. But it's some sort of a disease, probably some kind of fungal skin disease, right? In all likelihood, based on the description. But I'm not going to pretend to know what it is, right? But the bottom line is that it's this miraculous nature. But listen to the Rambam's words. The utility of this belief is manifest. He seems to be hinting that people only believe that these miracles happen the way they are, but that don't actually work that way. It's a powerful thing to say, but I'm telling you, I'm just looking at these words. But Rambam isn't going to go into this in detail. I'm not sure if he was afraid to, because he would get a lot of rotten tomatoes thrown at him, or what. But he's saying this miracle that was perpetuated in the religious community, these two miracles, that it was perpetuated. It sounds like he's saying that they were taught that these miracles occur in this manner, and the utility of them believing this, that the public should believe this, is manifest. There being also the fact that leprosy is contagious, but also when a person has this, and now, by the way, the translators, other translators like Goodman Lieberman and other translators that I've seen, they make it a point, and for whatever reason, he doesn't go into this here, the Penis doesn't. He's using the term leprosy, but the Arabic term that the Rambam used is not the Arabic term for the disease of leprosy, which was known at the time. There is a name in Arabic, which the Rambam was aware of and used in his medical texts to describe actual leprosy. The disease that we know today as leprosy was known then, and it had a name. And the Rambam didn't use that name when he translated Saras. That's something for those that are interested in those kinds of things. Just know that, right? Rambam used a different Arabic word to translate Tzara'at, and did not use the word that was already extant in Arabic for the actual disease of leprosy. The reason why purification from it was effected by means of cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet thread, and two birds is given in Midrashim. There's various medrash that explains why, but it does not fit in with our purpose. And up to now, I do not know the reason for any of these things, nor why cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread were used in the ceremony of the red heifer, nor why a bunch of hyssop was used for the sprinkling of the blood of the Paschal lamb. I cannot find any reason whereby I could account for these pieces having been singled out. So Rambam is basically saying, I don't know. There's probably a reason. You can work on it and think about it, but for the purposes of this chapter, I'm not going into it, and I don't know, right? So here we have the second instance where the Rambam openly says, I don't really know the reason for these. The reason why the red heifer is called a sin offering is that through it, the purification of the individual rendered unclean by a corpse is made perfect, so that afterwards he may enter the sanctuary. It's called a sin offering, not because it's being brought because somebody did a sin, which is the usual purpose of a sin offering, but but rather it's called a sin offering because it cleanses the person of this impurity or this uncleanness so that he can now go and partake of the temple service. The meaning of this is that in cases in which individuals were defiled by a corpse, they would have been forbidden ever to enter the sanctuary and to eat holy things unless there had been this heifer, which carried away this sin, right? I remember the term sin could refer to things other than actual sins. When we use the word sin in English, we think of doing something wrong, but here it's a state in which you cannot partake of holy things. This is similar to the plate worn by the high priest, which brings expiation for uncleanness, and similar to the goats that are burnt. Remember, he listed a bunch of goats that each one had its own purpose to atone for various sins. For this reason, one who engaged in the sacrifice of the red heifer and that of the goats that are burnt rendered the garments unclean. Similarly, one who approached the he-goat that was sent forth became unclean because of the great sins that it carried away. We have thus given the reasons as they appear to us for those commandments included in this class whose reasons we know, right? But there are others whose reasons we don't know, and he listed a bunch of them. But he did give us, I think, like I said, some of these reasons might strike us as, wow, that's really cool, I like that. And some of these reasons might hit us, well, I don't know. And some of these reasons might, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? But the process of making of reasons and using the method he gave us, right, of context, right, of understanding history and context, that's crucial. That's something that we can take home with us and remember. So any questions, comments, issues on this until now before we go on to 48? If there's none, we can go on to 48. We got a little bit of time to go. 40, I doubt we could finish it though. But 48, he's going to go into a lot of the laws related to kosher. So it's going to be interesting. So the commandments, this is chapter 48. The commandments comprised in the 13th class, I am now on page 598, are those that we have enumerated in the laws concerning forbidden foods and laws concerning slaughtering and laws concerning vows and Nazaritism, right? So these were all that in the Rambam's grouping in those books in the Mishnah Torah, and that is the 13th class. We have also they're similar in respect to the class 12, which was the laws of purity that had to do with the sacrifices, but these are the laws, the ritual laws, so to speak, but the ones that are related to not holy things, but related to the mundane things that are relevant to all of us, right? And he's going to talk about, let's say, meat and milk or something. So that's something that's relevant to us, regardless of what state of purity we're in, which is why they're relevant to this day. If you're going to eat an animal, it has to be has to be slaughtered properly. That is something that's relevant even today because it has nothing to do with the temple. So those laws are what included in the 13th class, right? I say then to eat any of the various kinds of food that the Torah has forbidden us is blameworthy. Any of those foods, there's a problem to us, right? There's some unhealthy, and I'm saying that on purpose, that term. There's something unhealthy, physically wrong, bad about eating the foods that are not kosher, right? Among all those forbidden to us, however, among all of them, only pork and fat may be imagined not to be harmful. You might think, right, that pork is not harmful. It's meat. It's just the meat of a pig, just like the meat of a cow. If I can eat a cow, why can't I eat a pig, right? So you might think, if I can eat the flesh, the muscle of the animal, why can't I eat the fat? But this is not so, for pork is more humid than is proper and contains much superfluous matter. This was something that was accepted by the medical scientists of the time. They thought that pork was just not a healthy meat. The major reason why the Torah abhors it is because it's very dirty and it feeds on dirty things. You know to what extent the Torah insists upon the need to remove filth out of sight, even in the field and in a military camp. The Torah wants us to be physically, actually clean, and all the more within cities. Now, if If we ate pigs who were used for food, marketplaces and houses would have been dirtier than latrines, as may be seen at present in the country of the Franks. That's what he calls the Christians, right? If you go to the Christian markets, the towns are disgusting because they eat pigs and there's pigs everywhere and filth and mud. It's gross, right? You know the dictum of the sages, may their memory be blessed. The mouth of a swine is like walking excrement. The fat of the intestines makes us full, spoils digestion, and produces cold and thick blood. It is more suitable to burn it, right? Blood on the one hand, and carcasses of beasts that have died on the other, are also difficult to digest and constitute a harmful nourishment, right? It is well known that a beast that is treifa is close to being a carcass. A treifa means a beast that has illness. It's just not healthy. So the Rambam is taking the approach that non-kosher foods are unhealthy, right? They're dirty, disgusting, and unhealthy, and therefore the Torah prohibits them. With reference to the signs, what about the signs, right? We know that split hooves and chews the cud, marking a permitted animal, that is, chewing the cud and divided hooves and fins and scales in the case of a fish, know that their existence is not in itself a reason for animals being permitted. It's not that the split hooves make the animal kosher, right? That there's something inherent to split hooves, but rather there are merely signs by means of which the praised species may be discerned from the blamed species. Using those signs, you can discern which species are okay and which are not. But why certain species are okay and why they're not is different. Which he's I don't think he's going to tell us. I'm trying to remember, but we'll see. No, he doesn't really go into why. But anyway, except for what you just said already, with the pig being dirty and disgusting. The reason why the sinew of the thigh vein is prohibited is given in the Torah, right? Why we don't eat that part, it was because, remember Yaakov Avinu, our forefather Jacob, and the fight that he had with the angel and his injury. The reasons for the prohibition against eating a limb cut off a living animal is because this would make one acquire the habit of cruelty. Here the Rambam is saying we're not allowed to eat from a live animal because that is cruel. And if you do that, then you're going to do something that's mean, and you shouldn't do that. You should slaughter the animal in a nice way, or at least the nicest way as possible, which he's going to say in a couple paragraphs from now, before you eat it. Such things were done in those times by the kings of the Gentiles. This was also an action used in idolatry. To cut off a certain limb from a beast and eat it. But that is cruel and disgusting and shouldn't be done. I think we can stop because I'm going to have to finish this chapter next time, and the conversation about reasons for kosher might lead us to some interesting discussions. So we can start having them now. We still have about 10 minutes before the hour is left. If anyone has something they want to contribute or say, or please, now's a chance, and we'll just start from here next time. Oh, before I say that, so the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be on a military training mission in San Antonio. I am not sure. I think I'll probably be able to find myself a quiet room, an office somewhere where I can give the class, and so on. So I hope to continue this class the next 2 weeks, but I will be sending out messages on the various places where I send out messages in case for some reason I have to cancel. But it's my intention to continue the next 2 weeks as we very rapidly approach the end of the Rambam, the end of this book, Mor Nevuchim. But anyway, okay, fine. I just want to let you guys know. But if there's any questions or comments, now's your chance. And if there aren't, then so be it. But there's a lot to think about.
Well, I have one thing. I seem to recall, or was taught at some point, that it's not just because the pig is unclean or has nasty habits, but it just was that it was said that we shouldn't eat that, and it has nothing to do with that sort of thing, or it being unclean or it unhealthy or any of those things. It's just that we were taught we were supposed to do that. It seems like Rambam always says, well, just don't say that's the case, find out the real reason. But also his reasoning doesn't seem,
that good.
grounded either. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
So it's important to understand that the Rambam explicitly stated several times that he refuses to accept the idea that there is no reason, right? Right.
Right.
So that's the Rambam, right? Now the problem with the Rambam is that when you take his approach, so for example, our example now of the pigs, and you say that you can't eat pigs because they're dirty or gross or filthy and therefore presumably unhealthy. Well, what happens when modern science comes around and does a study, right? And it turns out that most of us that in modern nutrition, we now know that actually pork is probably a lot healthier than red meat from a cow, right? That's just a fact. I mean, we know that it's true, right? So, so now the Rambam is so what happens when you do that? So if you take the other approach, and when you all study with me the Kuzri, right, which we're going to study next, you'll see some of the origins of that other approach, right? Both are legitimate approaches to Judaism, right? There's the Rambam on one side. I'm going to say Rambam versus Kuzri, but it's obviously much more broad than that, right? But these are two approaches that we find throughout the Rishonim, throughout all of the Jewish thinkers over time. Some who were more Maimonidean and were always looking for logical reasons for things, and some who were saying no, right? When you and one of their arguments against the Rambam is what you just said, like, well, but if you say that it's because it's unclean, well, what if it's not unclean, right? But so in defense of the Rambam, I think it's clear from the Rambam's language that he understood that he's making suggestions, possible ideas, right? Right? But some places, I don't necessarily know the reason, Rambam says, but there is a reason. You just have to think and look into it. So he's giving us guidance. He's giving us ideas, ways to find the right approach, right? But there may be other logical reasons, right, for us not being allowed to eat pigs, right? I might not be right, right? Because Rambam was basing his ideas on the science of his day or what he observed and so on. But I don't think any of these reasons are given by the Rambam as if this is what it is, and if you argue on me, you're wrong, kind of thing. The Rambam is just suggesting what seems to him to be the reason, and we've seen him use language that suggests that. So in his defense, what the Rambam is really saying is there absolutely is logic to the Torah, and I'm going to do the best I can to figure out what the logic is, and so should you, right? And if you happen to find some other reason, and my reason is no good, great. Now you learned even better. You came a little bit closer to the truth, right? So we may find another logical reason for not being allowed to eat pigs. Let me suggest, right, from the Sefer Ikrim, a couple centuries after the Rambam, who suggested a very logical, who took Maimonides, but didn't like all of this explanation for the reasons for kosher, right? And the Sefer Ikrim had a completely different but very logical understanding of the reasons for the kosher laws. And the Sefer Ikrim said that the reason, if you notice, all of the laws of kashrut in the Torah, right, are all revolve around the consumption of animals, right? The laws of sacrifice, the laws of slaughtering are to make it less painful to the animal. The laws of not eating a piece of a live animal are to stay away from cruelty. But the bottom line is it's impossible not to notice, right? And meat and milk is to understand that animals also have maternal feelings for their children, just like which the Rambam is about to state. But the bottom line is that all of these laws were designed to get us to stop eating animals, right? And if you look in the Torah, the Sefer Ikrim says this, another one of the most important Jewish philosophers, right? And if you look in the Torah, we know that the original intent for Adam and Chava was not to eat animals, right? And then we were allowed after Noach to start consuming animals for various philosophical reasons, which we can discuss at another time, right? But the Sefer Ikrim takes the Rambam's approach and says, yes, we need to be logical about it, but I don't like these explanations. I have a much better explanation, right? And the Torah looked at one of the animals that was most commonly eaten and says, no, you can't eat the pig, right? Even though that was one of the most ubiquitously eaten animals and still is till this day, right? And the laws of kosher all of a sudden make a huge amount of sense, right? All restrictions have to do with dairy and meat. And when it comes to meat, certain species you can, certain species you can't. And when you eat it, only certain parts you can, certain parts you can't. And even those parts that you can, you have to draw out the blood. It's a complicated process and procedure in order to discourage us from eating animals, because one day we shouldn't be eating animals at all. I'm just giving one suggestion from one important Rishon, and that's the Sefer Ikrim. But I don't think the Rambam would have had a problem with that. He would have said, "Oh, that sounds like a very interesting logical reason." Right? It makes sense, right? And as long as it makes logical sense, the Rambam would say, okay, maybe that's it. Not for sure. I don't know. Maybe someone will not like that one. Will come up with a better one. But the bottom line is, according to Rambam, is just using logic and common sense. Common sense is probably not the right word, but logic and reason and philosophically rigorous and scientifically valid thought processes, whatever.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
A lot. Yeah. It helps them.
All right. So we're going to continue this. There's a lot left. I just started touching on the kosher subject. We'll continue this next time. Hopefully that will be next week at our usual time. I won't have my cat running around. So, we should have a nice time anyway. So thank you again. I'll close up for now, and looking forward to next week. It was really nice. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, Saul.
All right. Welcome. Bye.